Okay, yeah. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Aman Munglani, and I'm a research director with Gartner's Data Center Systems Group. So, as a part of my responsibility, I in fact advise vendors on go-to-market strategies. I advise them on what are some of the things that they can actually do to reduce the pain points faced by CIOs and users such as yourselves. And I also kind of help end users, you know, decide on their storage strategy for the next, say, 4 or 5 years, help them, or rather guide them in terms of what are some of the technologies that they should be worried about, and how do you reduce the growth of capacity, or reduce the amount of money that you're actually spending on these capacities over a period of time, right? So, something personal about me is that I've been married for 10 years now, okay? And over the last few years, my voice has actually come down. The tone of my voice has actually come down for the last so many years now. So if you can't hear me at the back, okay, just wave your hand and I'll try and fix my voice again. So yeah, what I'm going to be talking about today is an issue that most CIOs face within their environments. And that is, how do I reduce the growth of capacity within my organization? I'm growing at about 80%, 90%, maybe even 100% on a year-on-year basis. And what are some of the things that I can do to actually curtail the growth of capacity within my organization? That's just one aspect of the story. The other aspect is, we have a lot of these things coming up, like VDI, we have storage virtualization, we have big data. What is the impact of some of these initiatives on my storage infrastructure? How do I reduce the complexity of my storage infrastructure? I'm going to be talking about technologies, but a large part of my presentation basically focuses on the fact that it is the policies that matter most. Harsha kind of spoke about this in his presentation, and I'll probably stress on this a little more. But the fact of the matter is, infrastructure is just one side of the story. What really matters is the policies. What really matters is a good, successful, well thought of plan. You need to decide as an organization, where is it that you want to take your infrastructure? You need to decide with basis interaction with the line of business leaders in terms of what is important, what is not important. Work with the leaders of the company in terms of deciding what is the vision for the company for the next, say, 4 or 5 years, what are some of the growth-related projects, and be proactive in terms of understanding where you want to take the infrastructure, right? I only have about 30 minutes, and I can probably talk about this topic for hours together. But I'll just touch upon the important things and not leave out anything that is too important. And if you actually have any additional questions, I'll be happy to answer them. If there's one thing that you take away from this presentation, it should be that your storage should be agile, should be efficient, and should be flexible. 3 extremely, extremely important points as you kind of go about designing your storage infrastructure. You look at the environment around you. The complexity of how you deal with the infrastructure, the complexity of processes, policies, and infrastructure, of course, is only going to get worse, right? And it is important as an organization that you basically plan for your infrastructure on three of these broad points. Okay? You can't choose one over the other. You can't say, I'm going to focus on my infrastructure just being agile, or just focus on the infrastructure being efficient. You need to think about all these 3 points in equal measure, because one of these points has an impact on the cost of infrastructure. The other point basically has an impact on how quickly you're able to respond to business needs. So it's not a decision that you need to take, say, I'm going to focus on this. You actually need to focus on all these 3 things in equal measure. As an organization, you need to move from being a hosting provider for internal users to being a service provider. Business requires you to be agile. Business requires you to kind of think quickly or actually provision infrastructure for them fairly quickly so that they are in a better position to kind of go to the market in a much better way, or much faster way. And as CIOs, as IT users, you need to kind of make sure that you're moving from being a pure hosting provider to a provider of services within your organization. You need to think about efficiency of infrastructure. A lot of these technologies have been available for quite some time now. For example, thin provisioning. You have auto tiering. You have solid-state drives. and scale-out arrays. These technologies are proven in the market today. They've been around for some time, and technology and vendors today have a fairly good, well-thought-of strategy behind some of these technologies. And of course, the long-term vision for you as an organization would be probably to think about something to relate to the cloud. Of course, there's some feedback about, or rather negative feedback about cloud computing and how it's kind of panned out over the last few years. But I'll probably explain this as I kind of move along. But one aspect of your strategy needs to start thinking about what is it that you want to do with cloud computing, and what are some of the applications that you actually want to push to the cloud. So my presentation is basically going to talk about three issues. Okay, how will emerging technologies such as virtualization, cloud, etc., intersect with storage? What are the best practices for improving your storage strategy? And what are the best practices for containing the growth of capacity within your organization? You look at the market, you look at technology trends. These are some of the top 5 things that actually show up. Number 1, server virtualization. A lot of organizations today, and probably reflective of the audience over here, actually moving from phase 1 of virtualization to phase 2 of virtualization, where you'd probably have 30% of your x86 infrastructure virtualized, and you're probably talking about the next 30% happening over the next couple of years. It's a huge spend on virtualization. But what you're actually doing also is that you're allowing the business to provision infrastructure as per their whims and fancies. Okay, especially as you kind of move to a private cloud environment, you're giving them added flexibility to kind of deploy VMs as per their whims and fancies. So each VM has storage associated with it, right? And that storage has different RPO, RTO requirements. As a result, you're dealing with a lot of complexity. You're dealing with a complex environment, and it is important that you talk about or you think through your storage infrastructure as you plan for your x86 virtualization. Talking about virtual desktops. The fact of the matter is, once you kind of go ahead and deploy virtual desktops, 30% of the capex is actually storage. Okay, if you talk about x86 virtualization, I think organizations have reported anywhere in the range of about 35% to almost 40%, increase in capacity requirements. Okay, so it is important that you think through some of these things and design your storage infrastructure to actually kind of accommodate that. Talking about VDI, a single desktop goes down, one user gets impacted. Okay, if your VDI environment goes down, pick a number. Okay? So you are dealing with an environment which has to be highly available. You are dealing with an environment where if something goes down, you're going to be inundated with people kind of trying to get to your throat and saying, what the hell, why isn't this working? Okay? And it is important that you kind of think about some of these things as you kind of plan for your storage environment. Private cloud computing. Now I mentioned that the vision for IT companies in India, or rather users in India, is to move from 30% to 60%. This is going to happen over the next couple of years. But the long-term vision for most enterprise class companies is to kind of say, hey, we are on the vision, or we are on the path to private cloud computing. Right? A lot of organizations have different policies behind this, but the fact of the matter is that that's the long-term vision for a lot of companies. And at some stage, you probably start thinking about a hybrid environment where majority of your applications are residing in-house, but some applications that can actually tolerate a certain amount of latency are sitting with the service provider. Okay, so that is a reality that's going to happen. Big data. In my opinion, I think big data is something that will probably see deployments happening over the next 1.5 years to 2 years time. Okay, the notion that big data is scale-out infrastructure is a wrong notion. What you need to do is understand what big data really means. And it is the analytics behind it that actually constitutes a bigger portion of the big data problem. Okay? So as an organization, you probably need to, big data means different things to different companies, right? For example, a small size company would probably have about 50 terabytes and think that, they're ready for big data. Whereas large size enterprises probably have about 2-3 petabytes of data, and they probably think that they're ready for big data. So yeah, work with your vendor, understand what big data really means before you kind of embark on this journey, and understand the repercussions on your storage infrastructure as you kind of start talking about some of these things. Okay, 24/7 operations. Organizations in India, or most organizations that I talk to, on an average have about 4 copies of the same data. I've spoken to organizations that actually have 24 copies of the same data. Okay, so factor in the environment, factor in the requirements of the business, factor in some of these things as you kind of plan for your storage infrastructure. A lot of these technologies today on this slide have been around for quite some time. Okay, you've had thin provisioning, you've had auto tiering, deduplication, and so on and so forth. Okay, quick show of hands. How many of you actually have deployed thin provisioning? 1, 2, 3. Well, that's a very 4. That's a very small number. And what do you think about storage tiers? As in, what's the level of deployment for storage tiers within your environment? Show of hands, please. Okay. That's again a fairly low number. So the fact of the matter is that despite all some of the reservations around these technologies, or rather the list of technologies available over here, these technologies are fairly mature. They have a profound impact on your storage infrastructure, and there are enough and more proof points published in terms of the impact or the savings associated with using some of these technologies. Thin provisioning, all right? In a typical DAS environment, we're probably talking about utilization rates of about 10% to about 30%. In a SAN environment, unmanaged, we're talking about utilization rates of about 35% to 45%. In a thin provision array, we're talking about utilization rates of about 70 to 75%. In most instances, it's storage that you will probably require for the next 6 months to 9 months. Right? And huge savings in terms of capex, huge savings in terms of utilizing better infrastructure, and of course power and cooling and so on and so forth. Okay? So if you haven't deployed thin provisioning already, it is important that you speak to your vendor and understand how is it that you can deploy these technologies. The typical utilization rate in India across all organizations that I have spoken to is in the range of about 20 to 25%. I've spoken to organizations that have utilization rates of about 45% and maybe even 50%. But the fact of the matter is that those users have a very, very well thought of storage strategy in terms of adopting some of these newer technologies, having well laid out policies in terms of data deletion and so on and so forth. All right, and it is important for you as an organization to kind of think about some of these things as you plan for your infrastructure. Auto tiering, another very, very important technology, right, has a huge impact on your cost of storage. Okay, I understand that there were some reservations about this technology, as in many felt that it wasn't ready for prime time. But the fact of the matter is, this technology is proven in the market today. All right, and if you haven't deployed it already, you should be talking to your vendor in terms of how you can use it. You know, you have dedube, you have cloud storage, you have, unified storage. Good proven technologies, and you should talk to your vendor. Architecture, moving from scale up to scale out. So a lot of the storage that you have actually been using over the last few years is of a scale up variety. Okay. The fact of the matter is that this technology lacks innovation today. Vendors are not focusing on the scale up variety anymore. A lot of the traction today, a lot of the technology innovation today is happening in the scale-out variety. I'll talk numbers over here. Okay, as per Gartner, 35% of storage infrastructure sold in the market today is of a scale-out variety. Okay, the benefits of scale-out is that you basically, grow your infrastructure as per the requirements of the business. It allows you the agility, it allows you the flexibility to kind of scale up to the requirements of the business on a short period of time. You no longer have to kind of go for those expensive forklift upgrades. Okay? So, if you look at scale up, it's pretty much reached zenith in terms of the number of disk drives it can actually support. Okay? And scale out is where a lot of the development is actually happening. We at Gartner believe that this 35% in India is going to grow up to about 50% over the course of the next say, couple of years, and probably kind of see a lot more innovation and a lot more growth happening over the next few years. Talking about the storage plan, thinking about the complexity, thinking about, all the things that are going to happen from a capacity growth perspective, it is important that you as an organization be extremely proactive in terms of deciding your storage infrastructure. Decide where you are today and where is it that you want to grow as an organization or go as an organization over the next, say, 4 to 5 years, right? Define the current state. Do not let a problem grow over you. Unless and until you have a proactive strategy to kind of address some of these issues, managing infrastructure will be a very big challenge moving forward. I already mentioned that capacity is growing at about 100% in India, maybe 90%, 95%. Organizations that tell me that they're growing at about 20% or 25% don't really understand or don't have a good view in terms of what is the capacity growth that they're actually seeing. Okay, so it's important that you define the end vision, decide on a strategy, decide on a plan, work with the line of business leaders. All right, unless and until you work with the business leaders, unless and until you have a good perspective of where the business is headed, an infrastructure plan is not going to give you the desired results. I've spoken to a number of CIOs today that said, infrastructure is the solution to my problem. That is a wrong approach. Unless and until you have a good thought of storage vision, infrastructure is not going to be of much help. Right? So you as an organization need to decide the end vision, which is extremely, extremely important. Of course, you need to kind of work with your business leaders. Understand from the business what are some of the growth projects. Understand from the leaders in terms of where is it that the company is headed. What are some of the acquisitions the company plans to make? Is it, what are some of the growth projections for the company? And design an infrastructure that will actually help the company grow as per their requirements. Considering the budget constraints, considering what are some of the things that are happening. The stock market yesterday didn't do extremely well. So the fact of the matter is that as you kind of grow along, the budget constraints are only going to get a lot more severe. Storage from a value perspective, the market in India is growing at about 24%. How many of you in this audience actually have IT budgets growing in double-digit figures? I just see one organization, and that's a bit of a surprise. But the fact of the matter is, most organizations in India today have IT budgets growing in the high single digits. And it is kind of rare to find an organization that is actually having double-digit infrastructure budgets. And it's unheard of for an organization to actually have budgets growing in the range of about 20% or 25%. So what is really going to happen is that you have to feed the beast out there, to feed the capacity growth that you're actually seeing, you probably will have to compromise on some of the other growth-related projects. So it's important that you think about, efficiency of infrastructure. You will be in a situation where you will be asked to do more with less. And as an organization, you need to kind of think about that. Dealing with storage choices. You as an organization need to move from the outer circle, which is basically the number of technologies that are going to be available moving forward. The innovation in the storage space is huge. All right? A big part of my responsibility, a big part of my job is to keep track of some of the innovation happening in the storage market today. Okay? And as CIOs, you will have a problem of choice moving forward. Okay? Because the innovation, the speed of deployment, or rather the speed of development is fairly rapid. And you need to think about, fair enough, these are the set of technologies. What is it that I want to use? What are some of the technologies that are apt for my environment? And what are some of the technologies that I want to use moving forward? Okay? There are various aspects to it. For example, principles. You as an organization might decide to go for a single vendor. May say, okay, fair enough, I've been using this vendor's technology for many, many years. My IT resources or my staff is well trained on this technology. and I will go ahead and use the same vendor time and again. Okay, Gartner recommends a dual vendor policy. Okay, but a single vendor or a dual vendor, I think as an organization, you need to decide what is it that you want to do. Okay, in-house versus hybrid. Okay, as an organization, you need to decide, what are some of the applications that I want to keep in-house? What are some of the applications which are absolutely mission critical for me, and I will most definitely keep them in-house? And what are some of the applications that I can actually move to a cloud provider? Okay, technology maturity. As an organization, you might decide that you do not want to work with newer vendors or smaller vendors. Okay, we don't recommend that, but then the fact of the matter is that you need to think about some of these things as you design your storage infrastructure. You have constraints. You need to get a good understanding in terms of what are some of the budget constraints you're going to face, what are some of the schedules that you need to work with, and what are some of the data center locations that you can actually have over a period of next few years. And of course, get a good understanding in terms of what are some of the requirements moving forward. You will also be faced with a lot of operational challenges. And the biggest operational challenge that you will face as an organization is to convince people internally that you're moving from here to here. Okay? Change always has a lot of resistance internally. And you as an organization need to kind of have resources, or the CIO needs to kind of have the responsibility of convincing internal resources, internal leaders, and so on and so forth in terms of, hey, this is the vision for infrastructure, these are some of the challenges we're going to be facing, and this is how you need to go for the change. Okay, I in fact recommend a lot of organizations to have a marketing function within the IT team. And the role of that person is to basically convince the line of business leaders in terms of what are some of the growth projects he has in mind, and what are some of the things, what are some of the changes that the organization will have to deal with from an infrastructure standpoint. The third key issue that I'm going to be talking about is how do you contain the growth of capacity within your organization. Just some numbers again. This is a global slide, but I'll just probably talk from an India perspective. The CAGR growth from 2011 to 2016 from a capacity perspective is about 95%. Huge numbers. CAGR growth from a revenue perspective in terms of how much you're going to be spending on storage is about 18.7%. Huge numbers again. Okay? In 2008, which was the year of the last recession, organizations in India actually bought 90% more capacity than they actually did in 2007. Okay, 2012, organizations in India are going to be spending 95% more from a capacity standpoint. Okay, on driving more additional capacity. So these are heady numbers, right? As in, you need to kind of start thinking about how are you going to approach some of these things moving forward, and you need to be proactive and take the bull by its horns in terms of deciding, hey, this is what I want to do. This is the problem that my infrastructure is going to face over the next few years, and this is how I'm going to be addressing them. Two complementary approaches. One is capacity management. The first approach is saying, fair enough, I'm not going to let my capacity growth be in those 90% or 100% or so on and so forth. There are a set of things that you can do, and I'll probably talk about them as we kind of move along. And the other one is talking about better utilization of existing resources. The biggest key issue in India over the last 4 years, and I think about 60% of the inquiries I do with end user organizations is, I have this set of resources, I have this infrastructure lying with me, what is it that I can do to better utilize my existing infrastructure? Okay? What you need to do moving forward is a combination of these two things. While at one end, you probably start talking about curtailing the growth of capacity, on the other end, you need to kind of start thinking about how do you better utilize your existing infrastructure. What I have over here for you is an enumeration of 10 different approaches that you can probably adopt to curtail the growth of capacity. Number one, information lifecycle management. I have a slide on this, so I won't get into this in great detail. Data deletion, tiered storage, data protection, data reduction. These are important technologies. These are important approaches that you can actually take. right? And they actually have a very, very profound impact on the kind of capacity growth and the amount of money that you need to spend, to cater to that capacity growth. Information lifecycle management. There is a lot of confusion about an ILM versus tiered storage, okay? And you need to speak to your vendor in terms of understanding the difference between the two. ILM cannot be successful till such time you have a successful storage plan. You need to work with the business to understand what data is important, what is not important, and set policies around some of these things. What is required from a compliance standpoint, understand that. What information can be deleted, what has to be retained, what methods of data protection, data retention are you going to be using, and so on and so forth. Okay? Data deletion. It seems very tough, okay? The way you say, fair enough, as in I don't need this data and I'm going to go ahead and delete it. Not too many organizations in India do that. In fact, if I give this recommendation in a one-on-one discussion, I actually have horrific faces looking back at me saying, how the hell do you think I'm going to do that? But the fact of the matter is that data deletion is one very powerful way of kind of dealing with the capacity growth within your organization. We have a strategic planning assumption around this, and we believe that 50% of the organizations world over will actually have an active data deletion policy by year 2015. Organizations in India, I know of a few organizations that actually have a data deletion policy already, okay, and have reported anywhere in the range of about 30 to 35% savings in terms of the capacity growth, and the infrastructure is actually being available for use for something else. The fact of the matter is that unless and until you classify this information, unless and until you have the required technologies to tell you what is good, what is not good, okay, what information is valid, not valid, okay, till such time data deletion would not probably work. The smart way of doing it in the past was saying, okay, find a system administrator or the IT resources would probably focus on this. But 60% or maybe 65% of what your IT resources do is maintenance. They do not have the time to think about some of these things. And as a result, infrastructure or capacity just kind of keeps building up. And that's a huge problem for you moving forward. Archiving. I won't get into this in great amount of detail because archiving, I think most organizations in India have a fairly sound archiving policy. So I won't focus on this in too much detail. Application retirement. 45% of organizations globally will actually have an application retirement policy moving forward. That's a strategic planning assumption, and we firmly believe that this is going to be a reality moving forward. A lot of organizations in India are actually thinking about application retirement, and the cost savings associated needs to be residing on the most expensive disks. Okay? The fact of the matter is, the difference between a high-performance disk and a high-capacity disk, high-performance disks actually give you 10 times the IOPS vis-a-vis a high-capacity disk. So the answer is simple, right? Or rather, it seems simple that put everything on these high-performance disks. But the fact of the matter is that not all your applications need that kind of performance. 60% of your data, or rather 80% of your data is unstructured, hasn't been accessed in more than 3 months. Okay, so it does not deserve to be sitting on those expensive disks. The fact of the matter is that only 10% of your data actually drives 90% of your IOPS within your organization. So you need to identify that 10% of data and probably put it on the most expensive tier or the high performance disks. And rest of the information, rest of the data needs to be sitting on those high capacity disks, which is probably required from a compliance perspective or from a perspective of some of the other things available. The fact of the matter is, the way to deal with some of these things in the past has been a storage administrator who goes back to the line of business leader and says, okay, fair enough, this piece of data hasn't been accessed in more than 2 years. Okay, why don't I just kind of move this to a lower tier of storage? The line of business leader says, sorry, that is not happening. That is my data and probably needs to be sitting on the most expensive disks. Okay, a huge cultural issue. So what you need to be doing as an organization is to implement chargeback. Once you kind of let the business be in charge of the infrastructure, Tell them that, okay, fine, this is the infrastructure that you're using and this is how much you need to pay for these resources. Okay, till such time the discipline is not going to really set in. And then as an organization, as CIOs, you need to start thinking about chargeback mechanisms, and that's going to be a very, very important step moving forward. Data reduction. Okay, we've spoken about it at great lengths. Deduplication, huge savings. Okay, the notion that 200:1 kind of savings are possible with data deduplication, that's not possible. In the best case scenario that we've seen is a 40:1 or a 35:1 kind of savings. Okay, deduplication on primary data, we're probably talking about 5:1 kind of savings. Okay, but the fact of the matter is that data replication is a very, very important technology. Okay, and if you haven't deployed it already, you should be thinking about some of these things as you kind of move along. I'll just end with some recommendations. Storage efficiency is extremely, extremely important. The cost savings associated with storage efficiency will actually help you reduce the amount of money that you spend on storage by a good 25%, 30%, or maybe even 35%. Think about a storage plan. It is absolutely critical that you have a good storage strategy in place, because infrastructure is not the solution to your problem. The solution to your problem is a well thought of storage plan, and infrastructure is just one side of the story. Okay, I spoke about agility, I spoke about flexibility of infrastructure, and I'd probably just say that storage plan is also one of the key takeaways that I'd like you to kind of take back with you as a part of this presentation. Unless and until you have a storage plan, your initiatives, your efforts will not give you the desired results. Okay? Considering the complexity, considering what are some of the things that are going to happen in the future, training of resources is a very, very important thing. And you need to be thinking about some of these things as you kind of move along. Because what happens is, the minute you get a directive from the CFO saying your IT budgets have been slashed by a certain percentage, the first thing you tend to reduce is training expenses. Right? And given the complexity moving forward, I think you're making a very big mistake by not training your resources adequately. Okay, so as an organization, as users, you need to kind of think about some of these things as you kind of move along. And of course, think about cloud. Okay, there are some reservations about the maturity of the technology, but I think most organizations use an excuse which was valid 3 years back. Okay, service providers today are fairly mature. The technologies available today are fairly mature. All right, and applications that can tolerate a certain amount of latency should be looked at moving to the cloud in some time in the future. Okay, so with that, I come to the end of my presentation. And if you have any questions for me, I'll be happy to answer them as we offline outside somewhere. Perfect. Thank you so much for your time.